90-Day Fiancé latest news, a heart-wrenching journey of hope and survival. In a dimly lit hospital room, the steady beep of monitors echoed in the silence, a somber reminder of the precarious balance between life and death. Bilal Hazziez lay motionless in the bed, his once robust figure now pale and frail. Beside him sat his wife, Shaya Sween, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her heart raced with fear as she stared at her husband, the love of her life, now battling for his. Not long ago, their lives had been filled with joy and anticipation. They were on the cusp of a new chapter, eagerly preparing to welcome their first child. Shea could still hear Bilal's laughter as they discussed nursery themes and colors, his insistence on keeping the palette neutral for a surprise. Their dreams were intertwined, their love a beacon of hope for the future. But everything changed in an instant. It began like any other morning. Bilal, resolute and steadfast as ever, was the anchor of their lives. Yet as the day wore on, his usual vitality began to wane. He complained of exhaustion, then dizziness. His complexion grew alarmingly pale, his eyes losing their lively sparkle. Shaya's concern turned to panic when his face slackened and his body crumpled. "Bilal," she screamed, her voice trembling as she frantically dialed for an ambulance. Paramedics arrived swiftly, finding his breathing shallow and his pulse weak. Shea could only watch helplessly as they worked to stabilize him. Her heart pounded as they rushed him to the hospital, her mind a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. In the waiting room, Shea paced back and forth, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. She called her sister in Trinidad, desperate for comfort. "He was fine this morning," she sobbed. "Now I don't even know what's happening. I'm so scared." Her sister's voice was steady and reassuring. "Shea, you're stronger than you think. Bilal needs you, and so does your baby. We're all praying for you." Shea placed a trembling hand on her growing belly, willing herself to find the strength her sister spoke of. But as the hours stretched into days, her fear deepened. Bilal's condition remained critical, and the doctors fought tirelessly to stabilize him. One evening, the attending physician approached Shea with a grave expression. "Mrs. Hazziez," he began gently, "your husband is battling a severe and uncommon infection. His body is struggling to fight it off. He's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can." The world seemed to spin around her. Will he wake up?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The doctor paused, his face etched with concern. "We're optimistic, but the next few days will be crucial. His recovery depends on how his body responds to the treatment." Shea felt as if the weight of the world had been placed on her shoulders. She drew a deep breath, her hand once again resting on her belly. She whispered a silent prayer, her resolve hardening. "You have to fight, Bilal," she thought. "For us. For our child." As the days turned into nights, Shea remained steadfast at Bilal's side, her love and hope unwavering. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: their bond, their dreams, and their shared strength would be their greatest weapons in this fight for survival. Shea sat by Bilal's hospital bed, her expression a blank mask of endurance as her fingers barely brushed his. The man who once stood so strong and self-assured now seemed impossibly fragile, his vitality drained by the cruel hands of fate. Her voice, soft and trembling, reached out to him as tears streamed unchecked down her cheeks. "You promise me forever, Bilal," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You said you'd be there for our child. My love, I need you to fight. Without you, I don't know how I'll do this." The days blurred into weeks, an endless cycle of worry and waiting. Shea leaned heavily on her faith and community during this storm. A small, steadfast group gathered daily at the hospital chapel, offering their prayers and unwavering support. Back home, friends and relatives from their mosque organized prayer circles, their voices rising together in hopeful unity. One of Shaya's closest friends placed a comforting hand on her shoulder during one particularly heavy moment. "You've always been the strongest person I know," her friend said, her tone resolute. "And Bilal is a fighter, too. Have faith in Allah's plan." But even with the love surrounding her, Shea felt the crushing weight of uncertainty. Late one evening, as she sat alone in the nursery, she ran her fingers over the tiny baby clothes she had lovingly folded just weeks earlier. The room, once filled with anticipation and joy, now seemed to echo with her fears. She placed her hands protectively over her growing belly and spoke softly to her unborn child. "Your father is so strong," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "He'll make it through. That's what I have to believe." Her faith wavered but never broke entirely. Each day was a test of her resilience, and each night was a quiet battle against despair. Then, one morning, as she sat vigil by Bilal's bedside, her phone buzzed insistently. Confused, she glanced at the screen, her heart leaping with hope and dread in equal measure. The hospital was calling. With shaking hands, she answered, her breath catching as the doctor's voice filled her ear. She turned toward Bilal, her wide eyes locking onto his face. A spark of life flickered in his expression, his eyes, tired but open, met hers for the first time in weeks. "Bilal," she whispered, her voice breaking as relief washed over her. "You're back." It was a turning point. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, the hope that had dimmed so painfully now glowed brightly. Together, they would fight for their future, for their child, and for the promises they had made to one another. Shea knew the journey would be long, but in that moment, surrounded by the love and strength of their community, she felt ready to face it. The room was dimly lit, the rhythmic beeping of machines blending with the faint hum of the air conditioning. On the hospital bed, he stirred. Though his face was pale and his body frail, his eyes flickered open, and a weak grin played across his lips. "Hey," he croaked, his voice raspy but laced with humor. "You didn't think you'd get rid of me that easily, did you?" Shada froze, her breath catching as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Bilal. You terrified me," she exclaimed, her voice breaking. "Don't ever do that again." A faint chuckle escaped him, followed by a whisper, fragile yet earnest. "I heard you," he said. "Your voice, your words, they kept me alive. And our baby." Her hands trembled as she held his, pressing them to her lips. Relief and love radiated from her as the weight of the past weeks finally lifted. It was a moment that marked the turning point of their lives. After weeks of uncertainty, Bilal was finally discharged from the hospital. His recovery, though slow, had been nothing short of miraculous. The man who had hovered at death's door was now walking out into the world, his wife Shaeeda by his side, her pregnant belly a visible sign of the life they were building together. Family and friends gathered outside, their faces alight with joy and relief. Cheers erupted as Bilal stepped into the sunlight, supported by Shada.